Parshat Yitro is Parshat Matan Torah. And the Netziv comments that just like before a marriage, you have to set out the rules. What a person's going to, what are the obligations of the marriage? That's how we start a marriage. At the wedding, we read the Ketubah of the obligation of the husband to the wife. That's the Masechet you guys have been learning all year. Masechet Ketubot discusses the obligations of the spouses to each other. Many of them of the husband to the wife. And so too, Am Yisrael, Hashem is going to take us to be His nation. There are rules, and I'm going to protect you. I'm going to take care of you. It's all part of that relationship. I've known Rafi Ostroff now for many years as an alumnus of the yeshiva, but I've taken awesome teacher certification course with the Rabbi Gush Etzion. I think I was in the first course, and maybe I made it up. And it's clearly a topic very close to Rafi's heart. He runs counseling weekends for couples to work on their relationship, to work on their intimacy. A topic very close to his heart. I recently did a course also with Rabbi Gush Etzion to be on the side of their Kedushin. And Rafi came to that class, and he told us that sometimes couples come to him and they're, let's say, from other backgrounds, and he said to them, everybody gets divorced, why are you going to be different? And because he really wanted them to think about what it is in their relationship. And this one, obviously he spent much more time with them, but he wanted to hear them talk about how they're going to work on their relationship. And it's a topic very, very close to his heart. So then he showed us a presentation. And in it, he showed statistics of couples who are in open relationships, who were okay with all sorts of things from all sorts of backgrounds, even amongst Jews. And it really presented to me, and that's why it's such an important topic, that there's an importance to the values of Chazal, and that they are not as rampant, as popular as they should be, and they need our chizuk, and that is why we have Rafi Ostroff here. He is one of the people working on this topic through all the marriages that are done through the Rabbanut Gush Etzion. You don't have to get married in Gush Etzion to use the Rabbanut Gush Etzion. That's all part of Rafi's department here in Gush Etzion. We're very appreciative of him for all he does for Gush Etzion, as well as for his time coming here to talk to us today. Timely topic for Masechet Ketubot.
תודה רבה רב יונתן. אפשר לשבת. Thank you very much. So thank you. It's a big honor to be invited back to Yeshivat Chatzion. I don't live very far. I live in Alon Shvut, but I don't teach in the yeshiva on a regular basis. That everybody knows. I was just very short biographical notes. I was born in South Africa. My parents made Aliyah. I grew up basically for most of my life. I've grown up in Israel. I learned in yeshivot, Merkaz Arav and Yeshivat Chatzion. I got married here in the Koilel. Been around different places in Israel and the world, and I've been living in Alon Shvut for many years. And the head of the religious council of Gush Etzion, which is you people coming from abroad. A religious council is a concept that is not prevalent anywhere else in the world. For the simple reason is that if you're in the countries, usually from the respective countries that you come from, there's a separation between religion and state. In Israel, there's no separation between religion and state. It's not a religious country. It's not a theocracy. It's not a religious country, but it's a Jewish country. And so, for the state actually supports many of the religious functions that you, in your respective communities, basically the people that fund the community, the families, the members of the community fund. So I'm head of the religious council, but I'm also an intimacy educator, a positive intimacy educator. That's one of the main things that I do, other than working in the Rabbanut. And that's what we're going to speak about today in preparation for Masechet Ketubot. And before I begin about what we can learn from Chazal, I want to place the challenges in front of us. And the main challenge that I think is, I think that marriage, a committed marriage, getting married, and loving your wife, and the only boy says, makes the talk much easier, loving your wife. I think it's the biggest challenge of the modern world, not only of the Jewish world, of the whole modern world. Well, let's say definitely the Western world. And it's a challenge that is unheard of, unprecedented in the history of the world, for the simple reason being that a few points that I'm going to point out, but more than anything, that today we have a nearly abnormal expectation from our spouses. We want our spouses, want them to be our friends. We want them to be our romantic partners. We want them also to be able to support the family. They must be fantastic fathers or mothers, great husbands and wives. It also helps if they know how to cook and clean. We want to find sexual satisfaction with our partners, and so on and so forth. This never, ever happened in the history of the world. People got married because it was more or less an arrangement that you had to do in order to survive or have children or somehow live in a community. There was no choice, and usually we didn't choose who to get married to. In the non-Jewish world, people got married. Didn't mean they have to be faithful to their spouses. Depends where, depends what part of society, and so on. But people got married because it was an arrangement. No one really expected to love their partners. If it happened, matov. Okay, so I'm lucky. But it's not a requirement. People got married without knowing exactly who they're marrying. They relied on the parents, on the shadchan, on whoever organized and arranged the marriage. And if you, I'm sure you have all seen Fiddler on the Roof. And if you haven't, I think Hollywood was created just so that there would be such a movie called Fiddler on the Roof. And it shows a very, very true, it portrays a very true picture of what is, how Tuvia, the milkman, how he sees marriage, what his older daughter thinks about marriage, his second and then eventually his third daughter. And that suddenly they are ushered into the age of romanticism. And we live in a very, very romantic age. And I don't think there's any one person sitting in this room who does not fantasize or hope or pray for himself that he will find a loving partner. Not just a partner, a loving partner. And that is probably the biggest difference and the biggest change and the biggest challenge, not only in the time of Chazal, 1,500 or 1,800 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, but also 120 years ago, or 130 years ago. Not much long ago. So probably your grandparents already chose their spouses, but your great-grandparents didn't, usually. And definitely your great-great-grandparents didn't. And they just lived their lives. So how can they live their life that way? Because there are many different reasons why people live their lives. And there's a scene in Fiddler on the Roof where Tuvia is contemplating whether to marry his oldest daughter, who's probably 17 or 18 or 19 or 20 maximum, to a 60-year-old butcher. A 60-year-old butcher. Now, in our world, we'd probably send either the father or the butcher to jail. At the womb, what do you mean marrying someone to a 60-year-old butcher? But if the option is between starving and marrying a 60-year-old butcher, then Tuvia the Cholev, Tuvia the milkman, as the father, he cares about his daughter. And the option is either starving, because he's a pauper, he doesn't have anything, and he can't give anything to his daughter. So either starving or marrying a 60-year-old man. And he says, you know what? I prefer her not starving and having a roof over her head. And so he goes for the shidduch until he's persuaded otherwise. And this is something that wasn't only in the time of Chazal, it's our time, mamish. But I want to point out a few other differences between our age and the time of Chazal, and just I'm pointing them out. I'm going to get to Chazal in a minute, what we can learn from Chazal. So if you go into the fabulous Utzar Sfarim of Yeshivat Artzion, I don't know how many shelves you will find on books on from a Jewish perspective on marriage and intimacy. I'm sure you can count them today in the hundreds. The amount of books that have been written about how to make your marriage successful, and how to love your wife, and how for the wife to love your husband, and what it means to be a Jewish husband and a Jewish wife and a father and so on. But if you would only go 60 years ago, 60, that's all, you would probably find one book. We're the serious older guys over here. Kama Sfarim, how many books were there 60 years ago that you can, that the subject was marriage and relationships in Judaism? I'm talking about the Utzar Sfarim. I'm not even talking about the non-Jewish library. In the Jewish library, in the Utzar Sfarim, how many books were written about the subject 60 years ago, 50 years ago? You could find one or two. Rabbanit Rachel Neriah, Zichrona Livracha, the wife of Rav Moshe Neriah, she wrote some very, very, very little concise choveret. She was one of the first people that wrote such a book. But there are no books. There's nothing. One of the other ones was Rabbi Eliyahu Kitov, wrote a book which was considered, wow, groundbreaking and so on. No one reads those books today because they're so old-fashioned. They've become outdated. So what changed? What's the difference? How come we have hundreds of books today written by every single denomination within Judaism? From the most Haredi to the most whatever you want. I don't know who's ever on the other side, but let's say there's someone on the other side. Everybody's writing about it. Some of them are more open, some of them are more closed, depends on the language. Some are for Hasidim, some are Litaim, some are for Mizrahi, some are for... But everybody's got a book, at least 10 or 20 or 30 on just for his denomination within Judaism. What changed? Why do we need this? Why didn't our grandparents need it, but we need it? I mean, if there's people are writing books, that means there's a demand. So there's very big change. So what are the other differences between, do you want traditional Judaism and where we live, where we are today? Do you want Chazal? So let's take the age of getting married. So let's say we get married today, somewhere between 20 and 30, the majority of us, somewhere between 20 and 30. In the time of Chazal, there's a whole different thing. If you're studying Masechet Ketubot, or Yevamot, or anything in Seder Nashim, then it's completely legitimate to get married to an 8-year-old girl, or a 7-year-old girl, or father accepting Kedushin for his... Now, Kedushin doesn't mean that they're getting married, but we know of instances of getting married. And there's no prohibition of marrying an underage girl. So I understand, wait, there's a complete different understanding of what it means to get married if it's permissible according to the Torah to marry an underage girl. And these things that we, every single person here would be labeling them as criminal in our day and age is something that you learn in every single sugya, like you can learn in so many sugyot in Shas. Again, but what is very interesting with regard to the age of marriage is that in Masechet Kiddushin, they give the limits. The youngest age to get married that's mentioned in Masechet Kiddushin, there's a short sugya of what age to get married. So the youngest age that's mentioned in Masechet Kiddushin is, anybody? Youngest? 14. And the oldest? 24. Shkoyach. So there's a 10-year span. But now there's a kol hakavod shkoyach. And that's like at least the later ages, somewhere between 18 and 24, is very, very similar to our times as well. So wow, that's very, very interesting. Now, we do know of people that got married at very, very young ages over the generations in the different communities. But we also know that, for instance, in the Lithuanian yeshivot, if you got married under the age of 25, more or less, then the Bochrim used to look at you as especially not a serious boy. They usually got married towards the age of 30 because you want to sit and learn. What are you wasting your time and getting married? And so there's a different approach to what age to get married in different generations. Can't say that there's one age. But again, if we go only according to Chazal, obviously there's a very big change with the fact that there's no prohibition of anybody underage getting married. But when we look at the issue of marriage, when we look at the mitzvah of getting married, so if there's a mitzvah to get married, so when you all became 13, you immediately started putting on tefillin. Now there's a mitzvah to get married and have children. How come we don't marry off all our children at the age of 13 or 14? Why not? A boy comes 13, a girl gets 12, they get married. You have to keep a mitzvah. What's the difference? Why did you keep the mitzvah? If you're supposed to put on tefillin at the age of 13, and if you take money, you can already start at the age of 11 or 12, as long as you know how to keep the nikiut of tefillin. So why not get married as soon as you become bar mitzvah? You chayav b'mitzvahs. So it's true that in the Mishnah and Ovos it says ben 18 lechuppah. But why not? So that's maybe connected to what I'm going to say somewhere towards the end. But there's other differences. We live much longer. So if we're getting married at the age of 24, and the majority of us are somehow, please God, I wish you all long life, me'avesrim and something like that, but let's say we don't live to 120. Let's say somewhere between 80 and 90. So we're expecting to live 60 years with the same person, plus minus, if God blesses us with health and so on. 60 years, 60. Now in the time of the Ramah, definitely in the time of Chazal, but in the time of the Ramah, the majority of men and women, firstly men died at the age of 50 plus, not much more, just because of the health conditions that there was at the time and the medicine that there was at the time. Women, most men used to change 2 or 3 women over their lives, because what happened to the woman? They died at childbirth. Many women died at childbirth. So there wasn't a situation where a person has to live with the same person, a man or a woman, have to live with the same person. He knows already all the jokes, all the discussions, they've discussed everything, knows inside and out. And like, how much can you really remake yourself or reinvent yourself? And it's something that there never was for many generations, because people lived a much shorter lifespan, but they also changed their spouses in many cases. Now, not all cases, and definitely we know of people that lived long age and so on and so forth. But because of the health conditions, at least until 100 years ago, then there wasn't this challenge. How do I love? And that's what Rav Yonatan mentioned at the beginning, that when I sit with a couple that's about to get married, the first question that I ask them is, what are you going to do not to fall into the statistics? Now, the statistics is a very big question. What is the rate? What is the percentage of people that are getting divorced? No one really knows to say. It's a very, very difficult thing to study, but I'll get to that in a minute, what goes on what's the situation in the United States and also in Israel. But I'll get to that in a few more minutes. But we're going to live with one woman for 60 years. We're supposed to love her. We're supposed to cherish her. We're supposed to respect her. We want the same thing from her. How do you love the same person for so many years? And is it possible? And is it possible that you can really love someone for so many years? That's a very, very big challenge. And then I get to Shidduchim. I don't know if things have really changed in Yeshivat Haretzion since I studied here, but I'm sure that at least the majority of the people sitting in this room will be the ones choosing their spouses and not their parents for them. A friend of mine that also studied here in Yeshiva once went to a shul in Mea Shorim, and his wife, she went to the Ezras Noshim on Erev Shabbos, and there was one girl there. And the girl that was there was the daughter of one of the Admoirim that lives in Mea Shorim. So they started chatting and talking, and the girl eventually told her, "Look, I'm looking at my Chatan, and he's dancing over there or he's sitting over there in the ulam downstairs." And she asked him, "Do you know him?" She said, "No." "What do you mean you don't know him? You never met him?" "Never met him." "When are you going to meet him?" "Under the chuppah. First time." And says, "But how can you marry someone that you never met?" So she says, "I trust my father. And if my father chose him for me, then that's what I'm supposed to be marrying." Now, that's Tuvia Cholev, the first daughter. But that's not how most of you are going to get married. I don't think there's anybody here that imagines that his father and mother, out of all people, maybe Rafi Cohen will choose the wife for you. Maybe you'll go for it. But your father, mother that will choose a wife for you, probably that's the one that you're going to say no. And it's a completely different ballgame than what it was. Not only in the time of Chazal, but the whole concept of shidduchim. Now, it's true that in the Haredi world, definitely there is the concept of shidduch, but even in the Haredi world, I would say that 90%, 95%, they meet the prospective person that's supposed to marry. In the Hasidic world, they meet maybe for 3 times or 4 times. In the Lithuanian world, they usually meet for much more, not much, a few more times, but they meet the person that they're supposed to marry. And every single side, both the Chatan and the Kala, have the prerogative, they have the right to say, no, we don't want to marry that person. And no one is going to force them into a marriage. No one's going to really compel them to get married. But it wasn't like that, and it's not like that in the time of Chazal. So can we, and there's the question, can we really learn from Chazal about our lives and what we want for ourselves and how we're supposed to be living our lives? And it's not only how we choose our partners, but it's also how we're going to be living as married couples. How we're supposed to be conducting our lives as married couples, and where we're supposed to learn it from. Can I learn it from Masechet Ketubot? So I believe, and this is something that I write enormous amount on, fortunately, but also unfortunately for English speakers, 95% of everything that I write is only in Hebrew. But I think that Chazal, and I think that Yiddishkeit has the most absolutely amazing path for our generation. And I'm not only talking about Jewish people, I'm talking about Jewish and non-Jewish people, with regard to how we relate to marriage, to women, and also to sexuality. And these are absolutely amazing things that I get from Chazal. Now, we can't take everything from Chazal, because, as I said, there is such a major difference between the time of Chazal and our time, that we need to be clever and know, we need to be able to discern what is applicable to our lives. And I'll give 2 examples. Many times I learn Rashi, not only Rashi, but also the Gemara, but there's the most beautiful Rashi, Masechet Ketubot, Tafchet, on Sheva Brachot. And if you learn Rashi Iyun on that page, the most beautiful things that Rashi writes about a chatan and a kala, and about marriage, and what are the expectations, and how they're supposed to behave. And I think that it is so relevant. Nearly every single thing there is so relevant to our lives today. And it's just talking about, and yes, Rashi from 900 years ago, 150 years ago, is talking about romance, and he's talking about love, and he's talking about finding joy one in each other. Rashi has a very, very special take on anything that's got to do with marriage and relationships, and I've been following him throughout the Shas, and also his Perush on the Torah, but mainly in the Shas, and it's really something very, very exceptional, something special to follow. That's on the one hand. So I can sit with a Chatan, and I can learn within that Gemara, or Chatan a Kala, or Chatan can take that Gemara and learn with his Kala as a preparation for getting married, because it's something so beautiful and so relevant to our lives. The ideals are so relevant to our lives. But on the other hand, there's a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, Daf Nun Gimel, which tells the following story: that there was a man that was married to a woman that didn't have hands. She either didn't have hands or didn't have legs. In Hebrew, the word is gidemet. Now, gidemet can also be someone without a hand, it can also be someone without legs. And the Gemara, he only knew that he didn't have legs when she passed away. And so, what are the Moraim saying? The Gemara, what an amazing woman, that she was so tsanua that her husband didn't even know that she's missing a limb. And Rava says over there, no, the husband's tsanua, because for a woman to be tsanua, that's natural. But for the husband not to look ever at his wife, to know that she doesn't have a leg or a hand or 2 legs or something like that, then he really needs to be praised. If any of you don't think that you're not going to know if your wife has a hand or a leg, then you need to think again. And you're going to know lots more with regard to your wives and your spouses about them, other than not noticing what she has and what she doesn't. And one of the most important things that you're going to be taught is that you have to notice everything, and you have to be considerate of everything, and you have to be there for her for everything, and so on and so forth. It's a completely different kind of a relationship. Now, what are you supposed to take from that Gemara? Now, it's true, Sharei Terutzim lo ninalu, and we can, and I can explain it, Beruchniut, that he didn't see it as a deformity. It's true, he didn't have a leg, but he never looked at her as it is a deformity, and for him, it was completely, she was completely whole, and she didn't have any defects, and so on and so forth. But that's not Pshat HaGemara, and it's not, none of the Meforshim say that Pshat. It's a modern apologetic Pshat on that Gemara. So not every single, and there's a Gemara that, by the way, in all the seminars for Keruv that please God you're going to be don't teach that Gemara. You can teach other Gemarot and other sources which are beautiful and amazing. That's not the source that you should be teaching. It probably won't be makab anybody to know that religious people don't know if their wives have hands or legs. So what? Yes. I think that the most important thing is that we should educate our children to get married. I think that's the most important thing. That's firstly the foundation, because that's not simple in the world today. Why did I say that marriage rates are divorce rates are difficult to know how many people are being separated? Because the majority of the people in America today, more than 50% of people in America today, don't get married. They cohabitate, meaning they do live together, but they don't get married. So if you don't get married, you also don't get divorced. And so it's very difficult to know how many people actually are married, stay married, for how long, and so on. It's a very, very difficult number to count. What we do know is that in Israel, what we look at the numbers that we're looking about in Israel are somewhere between 17 to 20% of people that get divorced within a certain amount of years after getting married. That's a very, very, very high number. Within the religious world, it's less. But I can tell you that within the religious world, the fact that people don't get divorced doesn't mean that they're happily married. Many people can remain in marriages for years and years, not for hundreds, for years and years, but not being happy and actually being very, very lonely. And I don't know what's worse, being lonely in a marriage or being lonely outside of a marriage. Because when you're in a marriage, you have expectations. And there are many, many people that are lonely in a marriage, and they're not happy in their marriage, and they don't know how to maintain their marriage and maintain the romantic side of marriage in order to be happily married. So I think that's what we can take from Chazal, we can take from Judaism, and what we should be taking is that the most important thing is, yes, firstly, we should educate our children to get married. And when I say to get married, not at the age of 30. Okay, so what age? Firstly, I'm putting that here. Educating that it's a value in our lives that we need to speak to our children about, and need to speak to ourselves. That is something to attain. For instance, in America today, many more people think that it's much more important to have a lot of money than to be married. The percentages are completely different. And many people say that it's much more important that you have a good career than have a good marriage. People actually have very low expectations of marriage, and having a good career is more important to so many people in America today than actually getting married. So, and that marriage is not essential. It's not essential to being a happy person. And I want to tell you about myself. So I was a yeshiva boy. There's a pnimiyah here not far from here where that's where I was as a bachelor. And we had a little monkey on me and my roommates. We had a little monkey on the table in the room. and was called the Bubat Zeze. Ze in Hebrew, okay? And every time one of us would come back from a date, we didn't have koach for other guy asking us how did the date go, was it good or not. So the dough that calls a bubat zeze means zeze or zeloze. So what we did, all we did is that if the monkey faced the room, then it's zeze. And if the monkey didn't face the room, like when we came to the room, we turned the monkey to the window, then zeloze. And that's why we didn't have to ask each other how did the date go. But so I was dating this girl, and after going out with her for about 3 months, she says to me, "Okay, let's get married." Kacha. And I wasn't 100% sure that's the truth. So I said, wait, I have to think about this. And I went back to yeshiva, and I said, we're not meeting for a week. And we'd be going out quite intensively for about 2.5, 3 months. And it was complete shidduch. My chavruta, my previous chavruta from the other yeshiva, introduced me to his wife's cousin. Never heard about her, never met her, didn't know anything about her. And also there was no Facebook, no WhatsApp, no. So I went to complete blind date. We met somewhere in Jerusalem, and I went up to her and say, "Are you her?" And had no picture to compare. It was considered antsniut for a yeshiva boy to ask for a picture. Now that when you talk about a picture, we're not talking about picking up something like this. We're talking about a picture, a real picture, like paper. No, you don't ask for a picture. It was considered not sanua. Wait, I want to tell you something about this. I'm stopping the story in a minute. I want to tell you something very important for your shidduchim, for your future shidduchim. I would say don't ask for pictures, but I know that you'll not be able to overcome your yetzer. But I want to tell you something as a teacher. I teach in the girls' high school. I teach Gemara here in the girls' high school in the Gush. Now during COVID-19, for a whole year, nearly for a whole year, I taught students that I'd never met before on Zoom for nearly a whole year. Now I'm looking at these students, they had to be with their windows open, and I'm looking at these students for a whole year nearly, and I'm teaching them. And I know their names because they had to write their names, they had to put their names on the window, so I know exactly who they are. And then at the end of the year, we had 2 live lessons in classroom. And I get to classroom, and at least 50% of the girls I don't recognize. I've been looking at them, at the pictures for a year. 50% of the girls I did not recognize, and I didn't know how to match a face to a name. So when you're going to get a picture for someone if you get a picture and you're prospecting whether should I go out with this girl or not. I'm not talking about dating apps. I'm not talking about, that's a whole different thing to speak about, dating apps. Which I thank Ribono Shel Olam so much that there wasn't such a thing when I wanted to get married. And I'm not even talking about that, but if you're going to get a picture, you should know it doesn't mean a thing. I promise you, I looked at the girls for a year and I did not recognize them when I met them in live. So pictures are not important because they're not the person. The person is a personality. It's a completely different being. It's a completely different thing. And that's why dating is so difficult today when people are trying to find spouses on apps, on different, I'm talking about even kosher apps, good things. It is so difficult, it's nearly impossible because it's not the real thing. You're looking at something completely else. Close brackets. So I get back to yeshiva. After she said to me she wants to marry me. And I nearly didn't eat or drink for a whole week. Couldn't sleep. Definitely didn't learn that week. And I felt that this was the most important decision that I'm ever going to make in my life. And until today, many, many years later, I still think that's true. that this was the most important decision that I took in my life. There's only one decision that is similar to that in its importance, and that is to have children. There is nothing that is comparable. Let's say you come to of a year in yeshiva in Israel. You've landed in yeshivat Acțion, and for whatever reason, even though it's impossible to think such a thing, you don't like yeshivat Acțion, and you want to go to another yeshiva. So it's not comfortable, and it can be difficult, and even maybe you went back home, and you wasted a year of your life. So you wasted a year of your life, but it's not a tragedy. You can turn your course around. Those that are going back next year to study in college, and you start learning whatever, and you don't like it, so you've wasted some money, and you've wasted time, and it's important in your career. Is a very important decision. But whatever it is, you can turn it around. And even if you started in your career, there are so many people that change careers over their lives. And it doesn't necessarily leave a very deep scar. But if you marry the wrong person, your happiness and a lot of your happiness and a lot of your healthy well-being is dependent on the person that is walking beside you. And that's why it's such an important decision. And I'm not telling you this in order so that you should shy away from this decision. I'm telling you this that you should understand what it means to get married. Now, if chas v'shalom, now the worst of the worst that can happen is that after 6 months you get divorced, and it's terrible. And I tell you that it's a tragedy for both sides. It's terrible, but you can get over it. And within a very short space of time, you can start going out again if it's not so bad, and so on. But if you've had a child already, if you got married and you have a child, you should know one thing, that even though there's a masechet in Seder Noshim called Gitin, and that get is the only word in Hebrew that the Gimel and the Tet are together, and there's no other word in Hebrew that the Gimel and the Tet are together to try and tell us that it's a get shekoret beno levena. But if you have children, you never actually divorce a person that you married. You will remain half married to her for the rest of your lives, because there's a child, and the child is both of yours, and and the child has a birthday, and the child needs to be taken there and taken back, and bar mitzvahs and weddings and whatever. And so yes, with one decision you can change the course of your life, and a lot of your well-being is dependent on that. So yes, my own personal story, that for a week I contemplated, is this the girl that I want to marry, and that she will walk beside me, and that whatever I wished for myself, and whatever I wanted to do in my life, I knew that it's dependent on her. A lot of it is dependent on her. Ken. And that's why it was so. The end of the story is that I went back after a week and said yes, but and we still married today, Baruch Hashem. By the way, when we went out, I want to tell you this is very important also for yeshiva boys. While we were going out, I said to her, listen, I don't have lots of demands, but I've got one. And the demand is that we're going on shlichut. Now, she's Israeli. My wife's Israeli, doesn't speak any English, never ever thought of leaving Eretz Yisrael, never ever thought of going on shlichut. And she wasn't even in Bnei Akiva. She was in this funny youth movement in Israel called Ezra. And I said to her, we're going on shlichut. We have to go on shlichut, because it was very much ingrained in me that if I'm in Eretz Yisrael, and anybody that's even got a bit of Torah in him, a little bit of reach Torah in him, he has to go give 2 or 3 years of his life for kilot Yehudiyot b'chutz la'aretz that don't have that reach Torah, that are on the verge of assimilation or need connection to Eretz Yisrael or whatever. And that was like, yes. Now these are things that I think that's important to speak about before you decide to get married. Listen, this is stuff that we're going to do. And like, as the minute we got married, like, wasn't the question, are we going to do shlichut? Like, I'm telling you this for another reason, and that is, what do we want from our lives? Okay, and this is also from Chazal. What do we want from our marriages? What do we want for our houses? And I think that every single person here is thinking of please God, getting married and starting a Jewish home, should have the intention and the will and the means and the ways that his house has open doors like Avraham Avinu le'arba ruchot hashamayim, and that a house can be like a nuclear reactor of chesed and of achnasat orchim and of keruv and of bringing in people that in their lives they're less fortunate, and that we're not getting married and raising a house and children just for our benefit. The multiple force of a man and a woman and a family, which can be a beacon of light, basically it's kind of living a life of shlichut, meaning that we living not only looking inwards, but also looking outwards. Very, very similar to the story of the building of Yeshivat Acțion and why the windows and so on. That our house is a house of chesed and a house of Torah for other people, not only for our children and not only for my means and so on. And I think this is something very, very important. When I'm going out or when I'm deciding what kind of house that I want, there will be a house of shlichut. And my children in my house, nearly every single Shabbat, because of different things that I worked in during my life, nearly every single Shabbat saw people from various backgrounds, from crazy backgrounds, on our Shabbat table. Because of, yes, I wanted them to be able to, other people to be able to experience what we're experiencing in my own home. And I think that is something that is very, very important to think about. Now, when a couple is invested in giving to others, invested also in doing chesed outward, I think that is something very, very strong for the couple as well. Meaning, having this idea of giving to others, not only to ourselves, not only living for ourselves. And I think that should be a motto for life, that we didn't come on this world only to live for our benefit, for me to make money or for me to live a good life, but to make sure that other people can have that thing as well. Last thing that I want to say is, and then I'll leave some time for questions, is that we're not Christians, as you know. And when I say that we're not Christians, it goes like this. Christianity from beginning has a complex with sexuality. And from the beginning in Christianity, the holy person doesn't get married. Now other people, the lay people, get married because the world somehow needs to have future generations. But if you really want to be a holy Christian, you get married to God. And Christianity saw the love of a man and a woman contradicting, or even as a tacharut, competition for the love of God. That's how Christianity views, and all Christianity, and even not only, and even definitely evangelical Christianity, but to a much lesser degree Protestant Christianity, but definitely Catholic Christianity, has this great complex with anything that's got to do with sexuality. And inherently, it's bad. It's part of the chet. It's part of the filah of Adam. And Judaism never saw it that way. Not only did Judaism not see it that way, there's this weird halakha that the Kohen Gadol, Erev Yom Kippur, has to be married, and there's no way that he can go into Kodesh HaKodeshim unless he's married. And to such an extent, there's one of the Tanoim says that you have to prepare another wife for him. And actually they get married, the other wife. That if for some reason his wife dies during the night, he will be married when he goes into Kodesh HaKodeshim. And you also say, what's the big shtick? So his wife died the night before, the day before. Okay, he doesn't have anything against marriage. and he'll go do the work that he needs to do in Kodesh HaKodeshim. We know that the Kohen Gadol is not an Avel. And he'll go and do what he has to do on Yom Kippur, in Kodesh HaKodeshim. And he'll get married the day after, 2 days after Yom Kippur. What's the story? Why is it such a big thing? I think it's got to do with that exactly. Because that there's someone sitting in Rome that when he goes into their Kodesh HaKodeshim, he cannot be married. And Chazal wanted to make sure that we don't agree with that. And that's not our derech. And that we do not see married, even romantic love, not only do we not see it as a contradiction to Ribono Shel Olam, to the love for Ribono Shel Olam, you cannot be a faithful servant of Hashem unless you are married. Now we know of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Holy of Holies, the biggest Nevi'im, the biggest Navi, and so on. We know that he had 2 children. We even know their names. Gershom and Eliezer, these parashot this week. What happened to Gershom and Eliezer in the end? What greatness came out of the sons of Moshe Rabbeinu? Klum. Now, if you were offered a shidduch, not you men, but if your sister was offered a shidduch with the son of Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm sure you would consider it a good shidduch. It's a good yichus. We know nothing about the children of Moshe Rabbeinu. They didn't go anywhere. They didn't continue his way. They didn't become gdolim. They didn't become anything. I think that the Torah told us, we know the name of his wife. She's called Zipporah. We don't know the names of everybody in the Torah. Definitely don't know the names of many of the women of the Torah. We don't know the names of many of, children, sons, usually we would know. Not in all cases, but it's important for the Torah to tell us. Moshe Rabbeinu, Adon HaNevi'im, the person that went up to Har Sinai and spoke to Ribono Shel Olam in this week's parasha, he had a wife and he had children, and it's not from God. We don't believe in that. That's not us. He had a wife just like any other, he had children just like any male and female have children. And it was important for the Torah to tell us that. And that's why I think that Judaism has such a beautiful middle path intake. On the one hand, we're not liberals that Rav Yonatan mentioned before. We believe in the sanctity of marriage. We believe that when someone gets married, it's a brit. It's not a shutfut. It's not a eskem. It's a brit. That's what people get married for. It's a real brit. See brit in Rav Soloveitchik, what it means. That's on the other hand. But what about romantic? We're all for romantic. No problem. But on the other hand, we don't believe in open marriages. We don't believe in liberal without borders. And that is what is so much missing in the liberal Western message of romanticism today. Yes, we have gvulot. We have borders. We have limits. And there are things that are not done. And that we keep the sanctity of family life is something that is so important that that's what can help preserve this issue of family and couples and love for many, many, many years. But don't get me wrong. It's something that needs to be worked on every single day of your lives. Every single day. It's not something that you take for granted. And even very frum religious people that maybe they think that they're okay with Ribono Shel Olam, they also need to work on the relationship of our wives. And our wife is the person that knows us best. Are we really, how really holy we are? There's the story of this, of an Admor. His name was Yosef. So what did the Hasidim call him? Ha'admor HaKadosh VaTahor. The people that grew up with him, they respected him because he was the Admor, so they called him a Rav Yosef. What does his wife call him? Yosef. Because his wife, he says, knows exactly who I am and I'm not so great. Our wives know exactly who we are and we can't act. But outside I can behave like an Admor and everybody think I'm so holy. Inside it's much more difficult because that's where we are natural. And that's where, and that's why a wife can be such a great mirror for us to see what our spiritual level is. Tov. Those were the opening remarks, questions, also the closing ones. Ken, Vaksha.
So I guess one of the big points you made was that one of the biggest changes now is that we don't have people deciding who our spouse is going to be, we're picking it ourselves. What impact, if any, or how much should we consider other people's input into who we marry?
I think hearing what our parents think and our good friends that care about us is something very, very important, because we all know that people can fall in love, and there's a stage in falling in love which is called infatuation, that we sometimes lose our judgment. We don't see the person that we are in love with as they really are. Now, if our parents, they object to who we're getting married to for whatever reason, and even in certain cases, even more than our parents, are very good friends. Friends that maybe you've learned to be yeshiva with for 4 or 5 or 6 years, and they really care about you, and they're saying, listen, she's not doing you good, she's not for you, then I would listen to what they're saying. With regard to the parents, they have to you have to see what is the reason. So I went out with a girl, and my father didn't like her because she's Faradia. That's why I didn't like her. For me, now he is a previous generation. For me, that's not a valid reason. Baruch Hashem, I have two daughters. No, one daughter, one son that are married to Sfaradim. They're the best chatanim and kalot. They're amazing. I have a Maroccite kala. Makes the best food in the world. I advise it very, very much. So it depends what they say. Sarah? Ken, b'kasha.
You spoke about the modern romantic ideal of marriage and how it's as a reality that needs to be navigated. But what do we think about it in terms of the romantic ideal and our own ideals? And what else do we think about when we have this ideal, right? There are many ways that life can go that doesn't meet up with these ideals. And how do we navigate situations in life that we're not going to meet those ideals?
I think, I'll repeat the question. The question is, okay, so we're living in a very romantic age. Who said we need to live according to the ideals of romanticism? Maybe it's better to live as it was before. Am I phrasing it correctly? So I think that there's a very important article. I'll say it otherwise. No, I said it like this. There's a very important article by Rav Kook which speaks about that in previous generations, people used to live out of instinct. Why do you live? Why were you born? Why are you living? Why are you working? No one asks those questions. You live because you live, and you work because you work, and you just live your life. Today, people are we're living a very, very muda. How do we say muda? Not informed, but we're very, very aware. Okay, we are looking for meaning. Thank God, our life has come to a change. We choose what we want. We can, and we have complete free choice that people didn't have in previous generations. We can choose to be religious or not religious. We can choose to where to live. We can choose who to marry. People can even choose their sex today. Something like this. We have completely free choice nearly in every single thing that we can do. So, because and Rav Kook's article says, that's what Ribono Shel Olam wants from us. He wants us to choose. Now, I think this is also meaning we want us to choose and not he wants us to choose God. He wants us not to be religious because I was born to a religious family or was born in a shtetl in the Ukraine. He wants us to be religious because I was born in Tel Aviv or New York or Jerusalem. I have a choice not to be religious, but I'm choosing to be religious. That's what Ribono Shel Olam wants. Now, I think that's also connected to choosing who to get married with, but also having a romantic life. I think that's Shir HaShirim, which is full of romance. Now, it's true, it's Shir HaShirim, it's Am Yisrael and Hashem, but no, the parable is, yes, take your loving relationship and learn from your loving relationship how to love God. Exactly what the Rambam writes in Ilchot Shuvah. Ilchot Shuvah? I think in Ilchot Shuvah. About learning from your wife how to love God. So I think that, yes, lekatchila, that's what we're at an age, spiritually, that's what Ribono Shel Olam wants. He wants us to live to love, to live a life of love. And I think that's where the world is leading to. And I think it's, from my perspective, I think that's what Ribono Shel Olam wants in this world for our generation. Ken, Baksha.
A few times in the Gemara it talks about what's the purpose for us in the idea of Ketubah. It's that Shalot Kal Beinav Le'otzia. But how do we understand that in light of the fact that people basically felt the need to have to stay married in order to stay alive? Like, was there even a real Halamida that the husband would just divorce his wife like that?
Firstly, that's also a very, very big difference. That in the time of the Gemara, usually women had absolutely no way of supporting themselves if they were not married, either their fathers or their husbands. And that's also a very big difference. That's one of the reasons of Ketubah. But what I learned from Ketubah is also something very relevant very, very relevant to us. Getting married is not only about love and romance and feeling good about yourself. There are obligations. Now we live in a world of rights. Everybody speaks about my Bill of Rights. The Mesilat Yesharim speaks about the first thing that a person needs to find out is what is ma chovato ba'olamo, what his obligation, what his duty is in this world. And when we get married, we need to know that we're getting married into a set of obligations and duties. And as the Rambam writes in connection to Ilchot Ketubot, that when a man gets married, he gets 10 things from his wife and is obligated in 4 things to his wife. Meaning that I think that the idea of the Ketubah, among other things, that we take upon ourselves obligations. And one of the obligations is, yes, to make this marriage work. Now, I don't think people take divorce lightheadedly. When I speak to people that got divorced, and there are many people that get divorced, it's a very, very, very difficult process. I don't believe that, I'm not saying, I'm talking about within the religious world. I think that people that get divorced in the religious world, it's a very, very difficult decision to take. But yes, I think what the Ketubah wants us to learn is Shelote Kala Beinav Le'otzia. Exactly that. תודה רבה.